A millionaire marries a chef from a local diner and is surprised by her past. Before the start of the story, comment below, which place are you watching us from today? Please enjoy the video. Daniel Carter, a self-made millionaire, had spent the last decade of his life building an empire. From luxury cars lining his driveway to a penthouse with a view that stretched across the city skyline, his life seemed picture-perfect. Every day, he moved from one high-stakes meeting to the next, surrounded by people who admired his success but never seemed to truly know him. His world was a finely curated facade, but even he couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that something important was missing. One rainy evening, as Daniel drove through the city after yet another exhausting day, he found himself detouring into a quieter part of town. His GPS had malfunctioned, leading him down a street lined with small shops and neon signs glowing faintly in the mist. Tired and hungry, he pulled over in front of a humble diner. The name, Maggie's, was etched in faded letters on a wooden sign above the door. It wasn't the kind of place Daniel would usually step into, but at that moment, he didn't care. Inside, the diner was a world away from the sleek, polished restaurants he was used to. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon, and the hum of conversation made the space feel alive. It was warm, inviting, and utterly unpretentious. Daniel found a seat in the corner, trying to avoid drawing attention to himself. He noticed the people around him, construction workers, students, and families, all laughing and chatting like they had no cares in the world. It was a stark contrast to the sterile silence of his high-rise office. Then he saw her. She moved behind the counter with a quiet confidence, her hands deftly plating up orders and chatting with customers as though they were old friends. Her name tag read Emily, but it was her smile that caught his attention. It wasn't just friendly, it was genuine, the kind of smile that made you feel seen. She wasn't dressed in anything remarkable, just a simple apron over her clothes, but there was something magnetic about her. It wasn't beauty in the conventional sense, though she was certainly beautiful. It was the way she carried herself, like someone who had seen life in all its complexities and come out stronger for it. Daniel found himself watching her, curious in a way he hadn't been about anyone in years. When she approached his table to take his order, her voice was warm and steady. "Long day?" she asked, and for a moment he was taken aback. People didn't usually ask him questions like that, not in a way that felt real. He nodded, offering a half smile, and ordered a coffee and whatever special she recommended. She didn't press further, but her presence lingered even after she walked away. As he waited for his food, Daniel noticed how Emily interacted with the other customers. She remembered names, favorite dishes, and even small details about their lives. It wasn't forced or transactional, it was as if she genuinely cared. Watching her, Daniel felt something shift within him, a quiet realization that this small diner, with its peeling paint and mismatched chairs, felt more alive than any of the luxurious spaces he had meticulously built for himself. When Emily returned with his plate, he couldn't resist asking, "How do you do it?" She raised an eyebrow, puzzled. "Do what?" "Make it look so easy," he said, gesturing to the bustling diner. "You seem like you actually enjoy this." Emily laughed softly. "You find joy where you can. Some days are harder than others, but this place? These people? They're worth it." Her words stuck with him. That night, as Daniel drove back to his empty penthouse, he couldn't shake the thought of her. It wasn't just her kindness or the way she seemed to light up the room, it was the sense of purpose she carried, something he realized he had lost somewhere along the way. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of curiosity, not just about her, but about himself. Who was she really? What was her story? And why, despite their worlds being so different, did he feel like meeting her was the most significant thing that had happened to him in years? Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. Daniel Carter wasn't always wealthy. Born to a middle-class family in the suburbs, he had worked his way up from nothing. His early years were filled with long hours, countless rejections, and the relentless pursuit of a better life. By his mid-30s, he had built an empire, a technology company that revolutionized the industry and turned him into one of the wealthiest men in the city. Yet, success hadn't brought him the happiness he had always imagined. His days were meticulously scheduled, from the moment his alarm went off in the morning to the last email he sent before collapsing into bed. He lived in a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, but the space felt cold and impersonal, more like a museum than a home. The art on the walls was chosen by decorators, the furniture imported from designers he'd never met. Even his closet, filled with custom-made suits and luxury watches, felt like it belonged to someone else. Daniel's relationships were no different. Friends? He had plenty, at least on paper. Business associates, high-profile connections, and admirers constantly filled his calendar with dinner invitations and charity events. But these weren't people who truly knew him. They were more interested in his wealth and what he could do for them than in who he was. Deep down, Daniel longed for something real, but he didn't know how to find it, or if it even existed. The same disillusionment carried over to his love life. Daniel had dated women who, by society's standards, were the epitome of success: models, actresses, entrepreneurs. Yet, none of these relationships lasted. They always ended the same way: arguments about time, priorities, or his inability to open up. He had convinced himself that love was a distraction, an unnecessary complication in his already demanding life. If his heart sometimes felt heavy with loneliness, he told himself it was the price of success. One day, Daniel found himself sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 50th floor of his company's headquarters. The meeting dragged on, filled with charts, projections, and endless discussions about growth. As the others in the room debated, Daniel stared out the window at the city below. From this height, everything looked so small, so far away. It was a fitting metaphor for his life. He had climbed higher than anyone expected, but in doing so, he had left everything meaningful behind. Later that evening, Daniel attended a gala hosted by one of his company's partners. The room was filled with the city's elite, dressed in designer gowns and tuxedos, sipping champagne as they networked. Daniel moved through the crowd like a ghost, nodding politely, shaking hands, but feeling utterly disconnected. A woman in a sparkling dress approached him, her smile calculated, her compliments rehearsed. He played along, but her words washed over him like background noise. "What's wrong with me?" Daniel thought to himself as he excused himself and stepped outside for air. The truth was he didn't belong here, not anymore. The life he had built, the one everyone envied, felt like a gilded cage. He stared at the city lights, wondering if there was something, anything, that could make him feel alive again. As fate would have it, that moment came sooner than he expected. The next day, Daniel's car broke down on his way to a meeting. His driver, caught off guard, called for a tow truck while Daniel waited in frustration. Needing to kill time, Daniel wandered down the street, his perfectly polished shoes clicking against the pavement. That's when he saw it, the diner. It was small and unassuming, with a neon opened sign flickering in the window. It wasn't the type of place Daniel would normally step into. He preferred Michelin-starred restaurants with tasting menus and sommelier-curated wine lists. But hunger and curiosity got the better of him. Pushing the door open, he was greeted by the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. Inside, the diner was a world apart from the sterile boardrooms and upscale lounges Daniel was used to. The tables were mismatched, the chairs slightly worn, and the walls adorned with photographs of the owner's family. Yet the atmosphere was warm, almost magnetic. People laughed, shared stories, and greeted each other like old friends. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt normal. He took a seat at the counter, his tailored suit looking out of place among the casual diners. As he waited for someone to take his order, he observed the people around him. There was an older couple sharing a slice of pie, a group of construction workers joking loudly, and a young mother feeding her toddler. Each scene was a snapshot of life, messy, unfiltered, and beautiful in its simplicity. And then there was her, Emily. Daniel hadn't noticed her at first. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her apron tied loosely around her waist as she poured coffee and plated up orders. But there was something about her that caught his attention. Maybe it was her easy smile or the way she seemed to know everyone's name. She radiated a kind of warmth that made the diner feel more like a home than a restaurant. When she finally approached him, pad in hand, Daniel felt an unexpected flutter of nerves. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice steady and kind. Daniel hesitated, unsure why he suddenly felt tongue-tied. Just coffee. And whatever you recommend." Emily smiled, scribbling down his order. "Coming right up." As she walked away, Daniel found himself wondering about her. She seemed so at ease, so grounded in a way he couldn't quite understand. For a man used to reading people, negotiating deals, closing contracts, she was an enigma. By the time his coffee and food arrived, Daniel realized he wasn't just curious about Emily. He was intrigued. There was a depth to her, something unspoken but undeniably present. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, even as he left the diner and returned to his meticulously planned life. What Daniel didn't know was that this seemingly ordinary encounter would become the catalyst for a journey that would change everything: his understanding of love, his definition of success, and the way he saw himself. And Emily, with her quiet strength and untold story, was at the heart of it all. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual, the memory of the diner still lingering in his mind. He told himself it was the coffee or maybe the homely atmosphere that had made such an impression, but deep down he knew it was her, Emily. There was something about her presence, her confidence, and the warmth in her eyes that unsettled him in the best way possible. For someone who had spent years surrounded by people who catered to his every whim, Emily's genuine nature felt like a revelation. By mid-afternoon, Daniel found himself driving back toward the diner, almost on autopilot. He told himself it wasn't unusual. He simply enjoyed the food and wanted a change of scenery from the sterile restaurants he frequented. But as he stepped inside and saw Emily bustling around the counter, he realized he wasn't being entirely honest with himself. Emily greeted him with a small, surprised smile as he took a seat at the counter. "Back so soon?" she teased, sliding a menu toward him. "Yeah," Daniel replied, trying to sound casual. "Figured I'd give the pancakes a try this time." Her laugh was soft but genuine, a sound that immediately eased the tension in his chest. "Good choice. Best in town, or so I've been told." She jotted down his order and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Daniel to observe the steady rhythm of the diner. As he waited, Daniel couldn't help but feel out of place in his tailored suit and polished demeanor. The diner was alive with authenticity. Kids arguing over milkshakes, a man in paint-stained overalls flipping through a newspaper, and a waitress chatting with a regular like they were old friends. It wasn't the world Daniel was used to, but it was one he found himself strangely drawn to. When Emily returned with his plate, she lingered for a moment, leaning slightly against the counter. "So, what's your story?" she asked, her eyes scanning his crisp suit and expensive watch. "You don't exactly look like the diner type." Daniel hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. Most people tiptoed around him, afraid to ask personal questions. But Emily's tone wasn't judgmental, it was curious, almost playful. "Let's just say I'm trying something new," he said vaguely, picking up his fork. "Trying something new, huh?" she repeated, her lips curving into a smirk. "Well, welcome to the best pancakes you'll ever have. Guaranteed to change your life." Her lightheartedness made him laugh, a sound he barely recognized coming from himself. "Big promise," he countered, cutting into the stack. "Big pancakes," she shot back, winking before moving to another customer. As Daniel ate, he couldn't help but watch her. Emily moved with a quiet confidence, effortlessly balancing plates while engaging customers in warm conversations. There was a grace to her that went beyond her movements, a sense of purpose that radiated through everything she did. She wasn't just serving food, she was creating moments, memories, connections. Over the next week, Daniel found himself returning to the diner more often than he cared to admit. Each visit felt like peeling back another layer of Emily's world. He learned that she had been working at the diner for years, having taken it over from her late aunt, who had built it from scratch. Emily spoke about the diner with pride, describing how it had become a second home for so many in the neighborhood. "It's not just a business," she explained one day as they talked during a quiet moment. "It's a community. People come here because they know they'll be seen, heard, cared for. That's rare these days." Her words struck a chord in Daniel. Despite all his wealth and influence, he couldn't remember the last time he had felt truly connected to anyone. In Emily's world, money didn't dictate relationships, kindness did. It was both humbling and deeply unsettling. But while Emily shared pieces of her life, she remained an enigma in many ways. She had a way of deflecting personal questions, steering the conversation back to Daniel or the customers around them. He noticed the way her smile sometimes faltered when certain topics came up, like family or her past. It wasn't obvious, but to someone like Daniel, who had built his career on reading people, it was impossible to miss. One evening, as the diner began to quiet down, Daniel decided to press a little further. "You're good at deflecting questions, you know," he said, sipping his coffee. Emily glanced at him, her smile guarded. "And you're good at asking them." He chuckled, leaning back in his seat. "Fair point. But seriously, you're fascinating. There's something about you, I don't know, like you've lived 100 lives." Her expression softened, and for a moment, Daniel thought she might open up. But then she shook her head, a small, wistful smile playing on her lips. "Everyone has their stories," she said simply. "Some are just messier than others." Daniel wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but he sensed that pushing her wouldn't get him anywhere. Emily wasn't hiding something out of shame. She was protecting something, maybe even herself. Despite the mystery surrounding her, Daniel couldn't stay away. He told himself it was the food, the atmosphere, the break from his usual routine. But the truth was, Emily made him feel something he hadn't felt in years: alive. Her laughter, her resilience, her ability to find joy in the simplest moments, it was like seeing the world through a fresh lens. But it wasn't just Daniel who was changing. Emily, too, found herself drawn to this polished yet surprisingly genuine man. At first, she had dismissed him as just another wealthy businessman slumming it for a taste of normalcy. But as the days passed, she saw glimpses of something deeper: loneliness, curiosity, a longing for connection. One evening, as Daniel helped her stack chairs after closing, she asked, "Why do you keep coming back?" He paused, caught off guard by the question. "Because it feels real," he admitted. "Like I can just be myself here." Emily nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Real's a good start." Their conversation hung in the air, unspoken feelings weaving between the words. For the first time, Daniel felt like he had found someone who didn't care about his wealth or status. And Emily, despite her guarded heart, couldn't deny that Daniel was different from anyone she had ever met. Neither of them knew it yet, but this connection, the push and pull of their vastly different worlds, was about to set the stage for something far bigger than either of them could imagine. Daniel's visits to the diner became a regular part of his routine, though he wasn't entirely sure when it had transitioned from curiosity to necessity. Every time he walked through the door, the stress of his high-powered life seemed to melt away. The diner wasn't just a place to eat anymore. It was an escape, a slice of life untouched by the pressures and expectations that consumed him outside its walls. Emily, however, remained a puzzle. She was warm and open in some ways, yet she held parts of herself back, as though guarding a secret. Her laughter came easily, her kindness was effortless, but Daniel sensed an invisible wall between them. Still, he found himself drawn to her more with every passing day. One quiet afternoon, Daniel offered to help her clean up after a lunch rush. "You don't have to do that," Emily said, surprised as he grabbed a towel and started wiping tables. "I want to," Daniel replied simply, flashing her a rare, genuine smile. He was used to delegating tasks, not doing them himself, but something about rolling up his sleeves in her world felt grounding. Emily watched him for a moment, as if trying to figure out what kind of man he really was. As they worked, their conversations grew deeper. Daniel told her about his childhood, the modest beginnings, the drive to succeed, the sacrifices he had made along the way. Emily listened intently, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and empathy. When he mentioned how lonely success had made him, she paused, leaning on the counter. "Success can be isolating," she said quietly. "People forget you're human. They only see what you have, not who you are." Her words struck a chord in Daniel. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him, but Emily's insight came from a place of understanding, not judgment. It was clear she had experienced her own share of struggles, though she still hadn't shared much about her past. "What about you?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. "You're so good at making everyone feel at home. Who does that for you?" Emily smiled faintly, her gaze dropping to the counter. "Life teaches you to take care of yourself," she said. "I've had a lot of practice." It was a carefully crafted response, one that hinted at pain without revealing too much. Daniel didn't press her, but he couldn't ignore the growing urge to understand her fully. She had a depth to her that he had never encountered before, and he wanted to uncover the layers she kept hidden. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened. Emily began to open up, bit by bit, sharing stories of her childhood and her aunt, Maggie, who had left her the diner. Maggie had been a pillar of strength in Emily's life, teaching her the value of hard work, kindness, and resilience. When Maggie passed away, Emily had taken over the diner, determined to honor her aunt's legacy. "This place saved me," Emily confessed one evening as they sat together after closing. "When everything else in my life felt like it was falling apart, the diner gave me purpose. It's not just a business, it's my family." Daniel admired her passion and dedication, but he couldn't ignore the sense of loss that lingered in her voice. There was more to her story, he knew, but Emily wasn't ready to share it yet. For now, he was content to be in her orbit, learning from her unshakable strength and quiet wisdom. Their growing bond didn't go unnoticed. The regulars at the diner began to tease Emily about her fancy friend, and even the staff started dropping hints. One day, an elderly customer named Mrs. Jenkins pulled Daniel aside as he was leaving. "You're good for her," she said with a knowing smile. "But don't you go breaking that girl's heart. She's been through enough." Daniel nodded, her words adding to the mystery surrounding Emily. He wanted to protect her, to be the kind of man who could help carry the weight she seemed to bear alone. But he also knew that trust wasn't something Emily gave easily. As their relationship blossomed, Daniel began to notice changes in himself. He started prioritizing time at the diner over late-night meetings and social events. His colleagues teased him about his disappearing act, but Daniel didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt like he was living, not just existing. Emily, too, began to let her guard down. She laughed more, shared more, and even allowed herself to lean on Daniel when things got tough at the diner. One night, after an exhausting day, she admitted, "I don't know how you put up with me." Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because you're worth it." It was a simple statement, but it carried weight. Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with something between gratitude and fear. "You don't even know the half of it," she whispered, almost to herself. Daniel wanted to ask what she meant, but the moment passed, and Emily quickly changed the subject. It was a pattern he had come to recognize. She would let him in, only to pull back before he could get too close. Still, Daniel was patient. He knew that building trust took time, and he was willing to wait. Their connection faced its first real test when Daniel's world and Emily's collided. One evening, Daniel invited Emily to a charity gala his company was sponsoring. She hesitated at first, uncomfortable with the idea of stepping into his world, but Daniel assured her that he would be by her side the entire time. When they arrived, Emily felt the weight of 100 eyes on her. The women in their designer gowns, the men in their tailored suits, all of them seemed to be silently judging her. Daniel stayed close, introducing her to colleagues and clients, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. It wasn't until one of Daniel's business associates made a snide remark about her quaint little diner that Emily's insecurities bubbled to the surface. She excused herself, retreating to a quiet corner of the event. Daniel found her a few minutes later, her arms crossed as she stared out at the city lights. "I shouldn't have come," she said softly. "This isn't my world." Daniel stepped closer, his voice gentle. "It doesn't have to be. I don't care about any of this, Emily. I care about you." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. "You say that now, but what happens when this stops being fun? When the novelty wears off?" Daniel shook his head, reaching for her hand. "This isn't a novelty. You're not a novelty. You've shown me more about life, about what really matters, than anyone ever has. And I'm not going anywhere." Emily's expression softened, but the doubt in her eyes didn't fully disappear. "I want to believe you," she said. "But I've learned the hard way not to trust too easily." Daniel nodded, understanding the walls she had built around herself. "Then let me prove it to you," he said. "One day at a time." Their relationship continued to grow, though Emily remained cautious. Daniel, for his part, was determined to show her that his feelings were genuine. But as the days turned into weeks, he couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's past was holding her back. He wanted to help her heal, to be the person she could rely on, but he knew that her trust had to be earned. Little did he know, the answers he sought, and the challenges they would face, were closer than he realized. Emily's past was about to catch up with her, and it would test their connection in ways neither of them could have anticipated. It was a late autumn evening, and the diner had closed for the night. The tables were wiped clean, the chairs stacked, and the lights dimmed, leaving the space bathed in a warm, amber glow. Daniel stood behind the counter, helping Emily organize the last of the receipts. This had become their routine, a quiet time they shared after the chaos of the day. Tonight, however, Daniel had a plan that would change everything. For weeks, he had been carrying a small velvet box in his pocket, waiting for the right moment. He had rehearsed the words a dozen times, but now that the moment had arrived, his confidence wavered. What if she said no? What if she wasn't ready? Despite his fears, Daniel knew one thing for certain. He couldn't imagine a future without Emily. "Emily," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up from the stack of papers, her brow furrowed in curiosity. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Daniel took a deep breath, his hand slipping into his pocket to retrieve the box. "You've taught me so much about life, about what really matters. Before I met you, I thought I had everything I wanted. But now I know that none of it means anything without you." Emily froze, her eyes widening as Daniel stepped closer and opened the box, revealing a delicate, sparkling ring. "Emily," he continued, his voice soft but unwavering, "will you marry me?" For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Emily's gaze flickered between the ring and Daniel's face, her emotions in unreadable mix. Then, to Daniel's surprise, she took a step back, shaking her head slightly. "Daniel, I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel felt his heart sink. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. "If this is about my world, about the differences between us, I don't care about any of that. I care about you." Emily's hands trembled as she set the papers aside. "It's not that simple," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are things you don't know about me, things I've never told anyone. My past, it's complicated." Daniel reached for her hands, holding them firmly but tenderly. "Then tell me," he said. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. I love you, Emily. That's all that matters to me." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and for a moment, it seemed like she might let her walls down. But then she pulled her hands away, her expression clouded with doubt. "You say that now," she said, her voice breaking. "But what if my past changes the way you see me? What if it's too much?" "Emily," Daniel said firmly, his voice filled with conviction. "Nothing you could say would change how I feel about you. You're the strongest, most incredible person I've ever met. I don't need perfection. I need you." Emily turned away, her arms wrapping around herself as if to shield her from the weight of his words. "I've spent my whole life trying to outrun my past," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And now it's caught up to me. I don't want to bring you into it, Daniel. You deserve someone who doesn't come with baggage." Daniel stepped closer, his heart breaking at the sight of her pain. "We all have baggage," he said softly. "The difference is, I'm not afraid of yours. I want to carry it with you, because I believe in us." Emily turned to face him, her tears spilling over as she searched his eyes for reassurance. For the first time in years, she felt the faint flicker of hope that she could finally stop running, that someone could truly accept her for who she was. But the fear of vulnerability was still there, clawing at her, holding her back. "I need time," she whispered. "I need to figure out if I can do this, if I can let you in." Daniel nodded, his expression soft but determined. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll wait for as long as it takes. Just know that I'm not going anywhere." Emily gave him a shaky smile, her tears still glistening in the dim light. "You're too good to be true, Daniel Carter," she said, her voice tinged with both gratitude and uncertainty. "And you're worth every second of it," Daniel replied. That night, Daniel left the diner with the ring still in his pocket, his heart heavy but hopeful. He knew that Emily's hesitation wasn't about him, it was about her. Whatever she was hiding, whatever pain she was carrying, it was clear that it had shaped her in ways he couldn't yet understand. But Daniel also knew that love wasn't about convenience or ease. It was about showing up even when things got hard. And for Emily, he was willing to show up every day, no matter what it took. In the days that followed, their relationship took on a new rhythm. Emily was more guarded than before, her walls creeping back up as she grappled with the weight of Daniel's proposal. But Daniel didn't push her. Instead, he continued to show her, in quiet, consistent ways, that his feelings hadn't changed. One evening, as they closed the diner together, Emily surprised him by reaching for his hand. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice hesitant but steady. "About us. About what you said." Daniel looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "And?" Emily took a deep breath, her grip on his hand tightening. "I'm scared, Daniel. Scared of what might happen if I let myself believe that this could work. But I'm also scared of what I'll lose if I don't try." Daniel's lips curved into a gentle smile, his eyes shining with hope. You don't have to have all the answers right now, he said. We'll figure it out together. Emily nodded, her own smile breaking through the shadows of doubt. Okay, she said softly. Let's figure it out. Though she hadn't given him a definitive answer, Daniel knew that this was a step in the right direction. He could feel the shift between them, a glimmer of trust breaking through the cracks in her armor. And for now, that was enough. What neither of them realized was that Emily's past, the very thing she feared would drive Daniel away, was about to come crashing into their present in a way neither of them could have anticipated. The journey ahead would test their love, their resilience, and their ability to weather life's storms. But one thing was certain, they were in this together. The quiet rhythm of their lives together began to falter one evening when Emily received an unexpected visitor at the diner. Daniel had just left after another long day spent helping her close up, and Emily was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, expecting to see a straggler looking for coffee, but her heart sank when she recognized the man standing in the doorway. It was someone she hadn't seen in years, a shadow from her past that she had hoped to leave behind forever. His name was Jake, and his presence sent a chill down her spine. His disheveled appearance and the hard edge in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. Jake hadn't changed. Emily, he drawled, stepping closer. Been a long time. Emily's grip tightened around the rag in her hand. What do you want, Jake? Jake leaned on the counter, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Just catching up with an old friend. Heard you've been doing well for yourself. His words dripped with sarcasm, and Emily felt her stomach churn. Jake wasn't here for pleasantries, he never was. He was trouble, the kind of trouble she had worked so hard to escape. She crossed her arms, keeping her voice steady. If you're looking for money, I don't have any. Jake chuckled, his laughter cold and humorless. Relax, I'm not here to shake you down. Just curious about this little life you've built. Word on the street is you've got yourself a rich boyfriend. Emily's blood ran cold. Jake's interest in Daniel could only mean one thing. He saw an opportunity. She took a step back, her voice firm. Leave him out of this. Jake's smirk widened. I'm not here to make trouble, Emily. Not yet anyway. But you and I both know you can't outrun your past. It's only a matter of time before he finds out. With that, Jake turned and walked out, leaving Emily standing frozen in the empty diner. Her mind raced with memories she had tried to bury, mistakes, regrets, and the tangled mess of her old life. She had spent years building a new one, carving out a space where she could feel safe. But now, the walls of that carefully constructed world were beginning to crumble. The next day, Emily was distant, her usual warmth replaced by a quiet tension that Daniel couldn't ignore. They worked side by side at the diner, but her smiles didn't reach her eyes, and her laughter felt forced. Daniel wanted to ask what was wrong, but he sensed that pushing her would only make her retreat further. It wasn't until later that evening, as they sat together in the diner after closing, that he finally broke the silence. Emily, is everything okay? You've seemed off today. Emily hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her apron. She had spent the entire day debating whether to tell him the truth. Part of her wanted to keep him in the dark, to protect him from the chaos of her past. But another part of her knew that keeping secrets would only drive a wedge between them. I need to tell you something, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Daniel leaned forward, his expression gentle but concerned. Whatever it is, I'm here. You can tell me. Emily took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Before I came here, before I took over the diner, my life was different. I wasn't this person you see now. I made mistakes, got involved with people I shouldn't have. Jake, the man who came here last night, was part of that. Daniel frowned, the name unfamiliar but already unwelcome. Who is he? He was someone I thought I could trust, Emily said, her voice trembling. But he used me, dragged me into things I didn't fully understand until it was too late. I got out as soon as I could, but not before things got messy. When I left everything behind. My old life, my old name. I started over. Daniel's heart ached at the pain in her voice. He reached for her hand, his grip reassuring. Emily, we all have things we're not proud of. You don't have to face this alone. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she shook her head. You don't understand, Daniel. Jake doesn't just go away. He's here because he wants something, and I'm afraid he'll come after you to get it. Daniel's jaw tightened, a protective instinct flaring within him. Then we'll deal with him. Together. Emily looked at him, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. You say that now, but you don't know the whole story. What if it's too much? What if I'm too much? Daniel cupped her face in his hands, his voice steady. You're not too much. You're everything. And no matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. In the days that followed, Jake's presence cast a shadow over their lives. He showed up sporadically, his threats veiled in charm, his intentions clear. Daniel, true to his word, stood by Emily, confronting Jake when necessary and refusing to be intimidated. But the strain took its toll on both of them. One evening, after a particularly tense encounter with Jake, Emily broke down. I should have never let you into my life, she said through tears. All I've done is bring you trouble. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Don't say that, he said softly. You've brought me more joy, more love, than I ever thought possible. We'll get through this, Emily. I promise. As Jake's pressure escalated, Daniel used his resources to gather information about him. With the help of a trusted friend, he discovered that Jake's past was just as messy as Emily's, riddled with debts and bad decisions. Armed with this knowledge, Daniel confronted Jake one final time, warning him to stay away from Emily or face the consequences. Jake, realizing he was outmatched, backed down, but not without a parting shot. You think you've won, Carter, he sneered. But people like her? They don't change. Good luck with that. Daniel refused to let Jake's words linger. He returned to the diner that night, finding Emily in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she cleaned. Without a word, he walked over and wrapped his arms around her, his presence steady and grounding. It's over, he said softly. He's gone. Emily turned to face him, her tears spilling over. How can you still look at me like that, knowing everything? Daniel smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. Because I love you. All of you. The past doesn't matter, Emily. What matters is who you are now, and the future we're going to build together. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. Jake was gone, and with him, the ghosts of her past. She still had doubts, still feared that her history might resurface someday, but in Daniel's arms, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, safe. As they stood together in the quiet diner, Emily realized that love wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding someone who could accept it, who could see all the cracks and still think you were whole. And in Daniel, she had found exactly that. In the weeks following Jake's departure, life began to settle back into a quiet rhythm. The tension that had hung over the diner like a storm cloud slowly dissipated, leaving room for something far more profound, healing. Emily, though still cautious, started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future unburdened by her past. And Daniel? He was more certain than ever that Emily was the person he had been searching for all his life. One evening, as they sat together in the empty diner, Daniel reached for her hand. You've been quiet lately, he said gently. What's going on in that beautiful mind of yours? Emily smiled faintly, her fingers brushing over his. I've just been thinking about everything. About us. About how far we've come. She paused, her voice softening. You've done so much for me, Daniel. I don't think I've ever thanked you properly. Daniel shook his head, his eyes warm. You don't have to thank me, Emily. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. His words brought tears to her eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of fear or doubt. They were tears of gratitude, of love. Emily squeezed his hand, her voice steady. I want to be the person you believe I am. And I think, for the first time, I'm ready to stop running. Daniel leaned closer, his gaze searching hers. What does that mean for us? Emily took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. It means I'm ready to let you in, all the way. No more walls, no more secrets. If we're going to build a life together, you deserve all of me. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Daniel smiled, his hand lifting to cup her cheek. That's all I've ever wanted. The next few months marked a turning point in their relationship. With Jake gone and the weight of her past no longer looming over her, Emily began to rediscover herself. She threw herself into the diner, not just as a business but as a reflection of who she was and what she stood for. She started experimenting with new dishes, redecorating the space, and even hosting community events that brought people together. Daniel was by her side every step of the way. He helped paint walls, move furniture, and brainstorm ideas for ways to make the diner even more special. The experience brought them closer, deepening their bond and solidifying their partnership. For Daniel, the diner wasn't just Emily's sanctuary anymore. It had become his as well. One Saturday, the two of them hosted a charity dinner at the diner, with all proceeds going to a local shelter. The event was a roaring success, drawing people from all over the neighborhood. As the night wound down and the last guests left, Emily stood in the middle of the diner, looking around at the empty tables and twinkling lights. You did it, Daniel said, walking up behind her. This place has never felt more alive. Emily turned to face him, her smile radiant. We did it, she corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Daniel reached for her hand, his expression serious. You've always had it in you, Emily. I just helped you see it. Despite the strides they had made, there were still challenges to navigate. Emily's self-doubt didn't disappear overnight, and Daniel had to learn to balance his demanding career with their growing relationship. But through it all, they faced each obstacle together, leaning on each other in ways neither of them had ever experienced before. One day, Daniel surprised Emily by bringing her to a piece of land on the outskirts of the city. The view was breathtaking, with rolling hills and a clear blue sky stretching as far as the eye could see. Emily looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. What is this place? Daniel smiled, pulling her closer. Our future, he said simply. I bought it for us. I thought maybe we could build a home here. A place that's just ours. Emily's breath caught in her throat, her emotions swirling. The idea of building a life with Daniel, of creating something permanent and lasting, filled her with both excitement and fear. But as she looked into his eyes, she realized that she wasn't alone anymore. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. It's perfect, she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. Just like you. Daniel chuckled, kissing her forehead. I'm far from perfect, Emily. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy. Their journey wasn't without its hurdles. There were moments of doubt, of miscommunication, of old fears creeping back in. But each time, they chose to fight for each other. They chose love, even when it wasn't easy. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily turned to Daniel. Do you ever think about how we got here? She asked, her voice thoughtful. Daniel nodded, his arm draped around her shoulders. All the time. Sometimes I think about how close I came to driving past that diner that first night. If I hadn't stopped, I might have missed out on the best thing that's ever happened to me. Emily smiled, leaning into him. Fate has a funny way of working, doesn't it? Maybe, Daniel said, his voice soft. Or maybe it was just meant to be. As the years passed, their love only grew stronger. The diner flourished, becoming a cornerstone of the community. Their home became a haven, filled with laughter, love, and the occasional burnt pancake from Daniel's attempts at cooking. They built a life together that was rich not in wealth, but in meaning, a life rooted in the simple joys of connection, resilience, and love. Looking back, Emily realized that her past, as painful as it had been, had led her to this moment. It had shaped her, tested her, and ultimately brought her to Daniel. And Daniel, with his unwavering support and unshakable belief in her, had given her the strength to stop running and embrace the life she had always deserved. As they stood hand in hand on their porch, watching the world around them, Emily turned to Daniel and smiled. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "For choosing me," she said. "For seeing me. For loving me." Daniel smiled, his grip on her hand tightening. "I didn't choose you, Emily. You chose yourself. I just got lucky enough to be part of the journey." And with that, they turned back to the horizon, ready to face whatever came next, together. Emily and Daniel's story wasn't just about love. It was about transformation, resilience, and the courage to face the parts of ourselves we try to hide. Together, they had proven that even the most broken pasts could be the foundation for something beautiful. Their lives, so vastly different at the start, became inseparably intertwined, creating a bond that was stronger than fear, doubt, or the challenges they faced along the way. For Emily, the journey was one of rediscovery. She learned that her worth wasn't defined by the mistakes she'd made but by the strength it took to overcome them. She stopped running, not because her fears disappeared, but because she found someone who stood beside her, ready to face them together. The diner, once a symbol of survival, became a beacon of love and community, thriving under the care and passion she and Daniel poured into it. For Daniel, it was a journey of awakening. He had spent so much of his life chasing success, only to discover that the greatest riches were found in connection and vulnerability. Emily taught him that true fulfillment didn't come from wealth or status, but from the simple, unshakable joy of being seen and loved for who you truly are. Their story serves as a reminder that love isn't about finding perfection. It's about embracing imperfection and choosing each other every single day. It's about building something together that neither could have created alone. As they stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next, one thing was certain: their love was a testament to the power of second chances and the belief that even in life's messiest moments, there is always room to create something extraordinary. What would you do if someone you loved had a past they were afraid to share? Would you stick by them no matter what, or would you need to know the whole truth first? How would you rate this story on a scale from 0 to 10? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Be sure to explore more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.